Lucas. It's for Congresswoman Johnson. In 1994, voters rejected a Democratic majority that they believed was scandal-plagued and out of touch. Given the Duke Cunningham, Tom DeLay, Mark Foley, why do you think Republicans deserve to remain in the majority?
I think Republicans deserve to remain in the majority because we're really right on very key issues. Now, I'm horrified at the behavior of some of my colleagues, but there's some of my Democratic colleagues that haven't received much publicity. The Democratic chairman of the Ethics Committee had to resign because he's being investigated for funneling money to nonprofits, of which he took a cut then. So I'm sorry about that. I'm embarrassed about that. Most big businesses do have some people like that. It's shameful. It's particularly shameful if you're in public service. You should be holding yourself to a higher standard. But look at this issue of taxes. We focused that tax bill so that it forced recovery. I don't walk through a factory here in Danbury or up the valley where I don't see a piece of equipment bought because we gave them $100,000 expensing. And that piece of equipment has made them productive enough so they're taking on new customers or a new customer group and hiring people. You've got to build your own in Connecticut. We're a high-cost place to do business. We don't attract businesses from out of state. But if you work hard and you have the right policies, you can grow your own jobs. And that tax bill has grown jobs. I'm the leader of the R&D Coalition. That helps big companies, actually many companies right here in Danbury who develop new patents regularly to keep at the cutting edge of advancing their product, of advancing the science, of assuring the security of the jobs they have, expanding their markets. Fuel cells. We put a terrific tax incentive in the energy bill. In fact, a third of the energy bill was tax incentives for new forms of energy. A third was conservation-oriented, and the other third was oil and gas. But the exciting thing is that the incentives we put in for the fuel cell industry have given a huge boost to that industry that needed to be able to make more product to bring the price of product down. So it was a very good provision, worked out closely with them. I'm proud of it, and it helped people right here in Danbury.
Chris, your chance for that question.
That was the quickest pivot from ethics to taxes I think I've ever heard. Let's talk about it. I mean, I guess I was hoping that there would be some road from here. I mean, we should talk for a moment about how we got to this place where it seems like every day we pick up the paper and there's a new Republican member of Congress going to jail or being indicted. The fact is that I think there's become just a sense of entitlement in Washington. That the Republicans think they're entitled to power and are prepared to do pretty much anything to keep it. And I think the fact that you would hear a defense from Congresswoman Johnson of lobbyists paid for travel is more evidence to the fact that folks down there just don't get it. They don't get that it doesn't make sense to us back home when we hear about a trip paid for by the Nature Conservancy, $18,000 worth of vacation to Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands. It just doesn't make sense to those of us back home. We want to hear what you're going to do next. And I got a few ideas for you. I mean, I've thought about this. Let's get private money, lobbyist money, and special interest money out of elections. Let's take a lesson from Let's clear walls between lobbyists and legislators. Let's increase the revolving door law. Let's increase disclosure requirements. And let's put a ban on that type of travel. Here in Connecticut, listen, we had some scandals with some of the people at the top echelons of our government, but we responded. We responded and cleaned up our act. And I think the fact that this Congress has not looked themselves in the mirror and decided that the sense of entitlement of power is so out of touch with the people of this district, and actually gone forward with the process of campaign finance reform and ethics reform is probably as clear a sign as you could ever get of why we need a change.
Before we get to our next question, I'd like to ask the audience to ask any questions they have to the end, and the league representatives to pick up those questions so that we'll have them when the panelists are finished. With that, we'll go to the next question.
This question is for Mr. Murphy. Transportation issues in this transportation issues in this part of the district are different than in others. Interstate 84 is congested from the state line through Southbury. What can the federal government do in terms of either funding or mass transit or improving Interstate 84?
You know, we were in Waterbury earlier today, Congresswoman, and I think the answer that applies to Waterbury when it comes to the connection between transportation and the economy is just as true here in Danbury. The salvation of Connecticut's economy lies in the opening up of our corridors to the major economic centers of the Northeast, which is New York and Boston. We need our businesses to be able to move goods back and forth, goods and people back and forth from New York and Boston in order to convince people to locate here. And the fact that Connecticut continues to get a paltry sum back to this state on each dollar that we give the federal government, I think should be very disturbing to the taxpayers in this state. As one of the richer states in the nation, I understand that we may not get back a dollar for every dollar we send, but we are amongst the bottom few states in the nation in terms of the money that we receive back. That is in part why our roads here are in such tough shape. But that economic salvation also comes in understanding the power of mass transit. And if you want to know how I look at mass transit, it's a very different vision from the one that this Republican Congress gives us. We ask our mass transit system to do something that we don't ask our roads and bridges to do: make money. We don't build rail lines if they don't turn a profit. Well, the profit comes in the long haul. The profit comes from the increased economic development that kind of investment in mass transit brings to this region. So I'm going to bring with me to Congress a laser-like focus on increasing funds not only for improvements to 84, but also to improvements to mass transit, which I think could much better serve not only Danbury, but Waterbury, New Britain, and all the major economic centers in this district that are struggling right now. No doubt they are struggling, but we can do better if we make those investments in mass transit.
Nancy Johnson.
No, I'm amused by my opponents chiding me about not going down the list of people with ethical problems. I thought I'd just be kind of polite and gentle because Nancy Pelosi is the next one on the list. Nancy Pelosi is one of the few members who was fined for giving illegal contributions to other members. Also, the Nature Conservancy, you know, I don't think of the Nature Conservancy as a lobbying group. They help us preserve our lands. They're highly skilled. They're highly knowledgeable. And if you don't yet know that environmental issues are global, you better get it, because it's not just global warming. It's global environmental protection. And that was as valuable a trip as I've ever been on, and you can't learn it without being there, talking with the indigenous people of the Andes. So I go to learn, to improve the quality of my service, and in transportation, the same thing. I was the first one to get money for the Little Housatonic Valley Railroad so it could restore itself and restore freight traffic and thereby save jobs in the Northwest corner. I also have been a loyal and strong supporter of Amtrak in Washington because rail is undervalued, underinvested in, and underutilized in America, and we have to do a better job. As for our highways, I fight for good money for our interstates because they need repair and upkeep. I'm the one that changed the law so that secondary roads could be repaired with federal money. Why? Because the small towns carry a very heavy burden with all the miles of roads they have to take care of. And their gas taxes could only be used on their primary roads. And so by changing the law to allow the money to flow to the secondary roads, I've helped the small towns manage their transportation burdens considerably. I've also been a strong proponent of the busway between New Britain and Hartford. We want to take the traffic off the highway with new and inventive approaches to transportation policy.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Scott Benjamin.
For Congresswoman Johnson, do you support President Bush's immigration guest worker program?
I do support a guest worker program. We're going to need people, but we have to have them come through a legal, established program so we know where they are, they get paid the minimum wage, they abide by our laws, and so on and so forth. First thing, we've got to enforce the law at our borders. We are a nation of laws. Yes, we're a nation of immigrants, but we are a nation of laws, and we cannot afford to delay developing the power to enforce the law at the border. I must say we're making tremendous progress. We put 8,000 new patrolmen at the border. We have improved the technology that the Border Patrol has for detecting motion at night, for seeing where the activity is, because too many criminals are coming across our border, too much organized crime is coming across the border, too many drugs, too much human trafficking. It's going to be an absolutely out-of-control situation. So yes, we have to enforce our laws, and that means border control, and that means arrest powers for our patrolmen and deportation powers without going through our court system. It means letting the local sheriffs and including the local governments in the states along the border in the power to arrest and deport under the guidance of the federal government, and it includes the federal government paying for those costs of arrest, detention, and repatriation. We have to enforce our laws, and we have to improve our legal immigration system, which needs rethinking in a number of areas, and we have to have an enforceable guest worker program. In that order. Thank you.
You tell us your applause before the end. All you're really doing is cutting into the candidate's time to respond. Chris, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm skeptical of the guest worker program. I am. I think that a guest worker program may end up lapsing into some sort of form of almost indentured servitude for the people that are here. I think that a lot of our policy on immigration comes not from what's best for regular people and small businesses throughout this area that are dealing with this crisis, but what's good for sort of corporate America. I think that you take a look at what's happened in enforcement so far, and you can get a pretty good idea of who this Congress and this President is looking out for. Here's a simple statistic. In 1999, there were over 400 enforcement actions, notices to fine of employers for hiring undocumented workers. In 2004, there were 4. We've stopped enforcing the existing laws that are on the books today. The most important thing we can do is actually recommit ourselves to the laws that we now have that say to employers as well as those that are here, if you break the law, you will be held accountable. See, there comes that word again, accountability, which has been lost. Now, border control is an absolute integral part of this. I don't disagree with that with Congresswoman Johnson. We need to do more to protect our borders, or this problem never goes away. But the fact is that right now we have an administration and a Congress, frankly, that I think wants to play more politics with this issue than actually getting anything done. We need comprehensive immigration reform, which involves border control, which involves dealing with the millions of immigrants that are here, and also deals with getting tough again on enforcement in the right places. I think if we do all those things, we can move forward rather than using this issue as a wedge issue to try to divide people, which I fear is at the heart of a lot of the Republican majority of Congress's intention on this subject.
This is actually for both candidates, but I believe it's Mr. Murphy's turn. Who are we supporting in the U.S. Senate race and why?
That's a hot-button issue these days. I supported Joe Lieberman in the primary. I'm supporting Ned Lamont in the general election. Joe has been a longtime friend of mine. Ned Lamont is a newer friend, but I'm supporting Ned Lamont for U.S. Senate.
Nancy?
I have a lot of respect for the knowledge that Mr. Schlesinger has picked up. I served with him in the General Assembly. He's very, very smart. But I'm supporting Joe Lieberman, and I'll tell you why. I've worked very deeply in my district. I'm at Rotary, I'm at Lions, I'm at the Senior Citizen Center, and I'm in the factory talking to the guys. If there's one thing I've heard over and over and over again, it's we've got to get rid of the partisan rancor. Joe Lieberman works across the aisle. He listens to people on both sides. He talks with the experts. He's one of the best informed members of the United States Senate. to lose that body of experience that he's had, his depth of knowledge, his bipartisanness, his civility, would be a significant loss to the state Senate, United States Senate. And to replace it with someone who has no experience in the process of lawmaking and only the experience of an uncivil campaign, this would be a loss to the United States of America. One of the strengths of my candidacy is that I am a very independent Republican, by anyone's measure, whether it's the Congressional Quarterly, whether it's the National Journal, whether it's anyone in Washington. Of the Republicans in Congress, I am always somewhere between 1 and 10 most independent. And I'm proud of that, because it means that I look at the problem. Problems aren't Republican or Democrat. Problems are problems, and they need experience and judgment and seasoning to solve when they're going to affect all the people all across the United States in little tiny hamlets of Idaho and the tough parts of Chicago and Los Angeles and New York. You need bipartisanship. I'm known for that. I work across party lines, across the aisle. Every big piece of legislation I've had to have Democrats and Republicans, and my colleague here is a 97% partisan voting record.
Final question from the panel will come from Jolene Morrow.
This is for Congresswoman Johnson. Right now, Attorney General Richard Blumenthal has a lawsuit against the federal No Child Left Behind Act and what he calls unfunded mandates. How can that be reformed, or more money come to the state to relieve some of the burdens on the schools?
Thank you. You know, I don't support the Attorney General's suit, and this is why. No Child Left Behind is a very narrow mandate, and the mandate's funded. The mandate is only about testing. The problem is that children aren't just about testing. And we need to follow up what we have learned from No Child Left Behind. And remember, what we've learned from No Child Left Behind is big. Connecticut has excellent schools. I'm blessed to represent a lot of excellent schools. You and Danbury here are blessed to have very good schools, lots of the surrounding towns. But we also have the biggest gap. Does that make you proud? The biggest gap between those who are doing well and those who aren't. And those who aren't are mostly in the city. Half of our minority kids nationwide are not graduating from high school, and of the half that do, half of those can't read and don't do math. Now, it's a shameful national record, and we put it on the table and we found it out. Now, and I have been careful to make sure that Title I monies went up and the testing got paid for. But we have to do much more than that. We have to reform the program, because you absolutely can't have a whole school be made to appear as failing when one small subgroup did. And it's a subgroup that can't, in the long run, pass the tests anyway because of the particular disabilities of the people in the subgroup. So we have to change that approach. We have to eliminate, we have to completely change the definition of special ed child. Remember, this is a bill negotiated by Senator Kennedy's staff and the President's staff. And most of this testing stuff, in fact, wasn't in the House bill. We all accepted it because we sort of thought they must have come out with something reasonable. Lots of parts of that bill are not reasonable. But I want not only to change the law, and I spent a lot of time in schools talking to principals and superintendents, so I'm prepared to do that next year, but we need more money to go directly to schools, not through the State Department of Education, directly to the schools that have a plan to address their problems and succeed, and they know how to do it.
Chris?
Thank you. I want to return to the last question for a moment, because I think it is somewhat surprising to us to hear a defense of Congresswoman Johnson's independence, because as we look at the most important issues that we face, the Medicare prescription drug law, the war in Iraq, the president's energy policies, the very backwards Bush budget, on all of those issues, Congresswoman Johnson sometimes isn't just a cheerleader for this president. Sometimes she's the decision-making, the tie-breaking vote. That's not independence. That's a degree of loyalty that a lot of people in this district are very angry about. And the reason that there is enthusiasm behind Ned Lamont's candidacy is that people are crying out for a change in Washington. They're crying out for people to go down there and stand up, not just to this president, but to all of the special interests that control that place right now. And that's why people are rallying around Ned Lamont today. Now let's talk about education, because this is the second time that I've heard Congresswoman Johnson tell us that the only mandate in the No Child Left Behind Act is testing. Now, you go into any of the schools in this district, and they'll tell you that they think the mandate is a little bit broader than handing out number 2 pencils to students. They know the mandate is about forcing schools who fall on a list with sometimes arbitrary measures to get off that list. That the mandate is to give more tests, to do more training for teachers. And a lot of schools are okay with improving the quality of education, so long as there's money behind it. And this notion that the No Child Left Behind Act was fully funded is a fiction. It's a fiction. And again, refer to stories in the Hartford Courant and almost every other major publication in the state to tell you that in this last year, the No Child Left Behind Act was $18 million underfunded for the state of Connecticut, below what the authorizing act allowed for. That's why the Attorney General has sued, because we all agree here in the state of Connecticut, those of us that are dealing with it on the ground floor, that we didn't put our money where our mouth was.
Thank you. We'll now get to the portion of the debate that takes questions from the audience. And as you might expect, one of the first questions we have was on the No Child Left Behind Act. It was just covered by both of the candidates. This question is directed to Chris Murphy, and Chris, if you'll take 1 minute to respond, to answer, and then Nancy, you'll have 1 minute to answer. It says, recently the Sierra Club, the nation's largest environmental organization, chose you to share in the endorsement and denied Representative Johnson a single endorsement based on her voting record this year. To follow up on that, how do you plan on reorganizing this country's priorities so we are less dependent on fossil fuel while protecting environmentally sensitive areas from exploration in the interim?
Well, this was a pretty amazing development in this race. You know, it's a normal course of business for these Washington groups to circle the wagons and support incumbents no matter their record. And the choice for the Sierra Club was clear in this race. You know, sometimes you don't have numbers to back up the difference between the candidates, but we luckily have the League of Conservation Voters that does a scorecard every year. And over the last 3 years, Congresswoman Johnson's score from that group has been about a 65 rating. That's a D rating. They score us at the state capitol as well. And that same group's score for me during that period was a 95 rating, an A. If you want the difference between the two candidates, there it is. Sierra Club decided not to endorse Congresswoman Johnson for the first time in a number of years because she has sided with this president on his energy policy. She has voted to cut massive amounts from open space preservation programs to allow for offshore drilling. All sorts of things that the Sierra Club opposes. We can set a new direction, but it needs to start here in this district.
Nancy?
A non-endorsement by the Sierra Club in this kind of waste was a win for a Republican. Don't you get it? I was one of 8 Republicans across the whole nation endorsed by the Sierra Club. And I'm proud of it. And I was endorsed by the League of Conservation Voters, too. And I got a nice award from the Audubon Society. In fact, from the Sierra Club, I got the Wayland Award, which is only given on merit. It is not given regularly, and I got it for my work in protecting the ANWR, because I not only voted for it, I not only led the coalition, I led it and beat my leadership. That takes courage. You see his own voting record at 97%, but nowhere in his performance at the state level do you see him in the face of your leadership. Now, you have to be sometimes. On that one vote that he refers to, that was on a very loose budget resolution. But my colleagues and I happen to be the leader of this particular gang too, we forced the leadership to accept $7 billion more in the section of the budget that does education and labor, and I'm proud of it. You need to be independent and courageous, and I am.
Thank you. The next question, I guess it should go to Nancy first, and I'll try and phrase this the way it's written. 89,000 seniors in Connecticut were falling into the donut hole this year and will not get out of it until they pay $3,600 out of pocket for prescription drugs. What would you do to help seniors
But what I do
afford this gap and make it out of the hole?
Okay. What I tell you is, change plans in November. Because in November, the next round of plans, and this is the beauty of competition, if we were to fill that donut hole, it would cost $450 billion. By everybody paying a little bit, and the other day down at the pharmacy, the person next to me was going to pay a total of $80 between now and January. By everybody doing a little bit, we saved our kids behind us. Those of us over 65 will cost our kids $450 billion less. But look what the market has done. Next November, you'll have 12 plans to choose from that cover the donut hole at very little bit more. The average premium of these plans is going to stay at $24, just like last year, but the benefits are going to be much greater. Isn't that better than paying higher taxes through competition, driving down costs? Of course it is. And you know what? Now you're seeing Target and Walmart figure it out. They don't need all that profit on drugs. That's going to drive the price down. You know what really did it was price transparency. Now you can see who people charge, and you've never seen that before.
Chris.
Congressman Johnson's answer to seniors that are falling into the donut hole is change plans next November. Here's my answer. Change Congress this November. Choice not to cover the donut hole. We could get $50 billion in savings, maybe not that much, but certainly enough in savings from negotiating bulk purchasing prices with the drug companies that we would have plenty of money to cover that donut hole. We don't have to hope that there's just one plan that by the grace of the insurance companies loads up on premiums and deductibles to eliminate the donut hole. We could make the choice ourselves as a society that it doesn't make sense to force senior citizens onto their own dime after having been part of a plan that they did not know in many cases was going to give them that gap in coverage. We can make that choice, but it doesn't come with seniors making a different choice next November. It comes by us making a different choice this November.
One final question. Why is Congress passing laws that are violating the U.S. Constitution? The Patriot Act and the recent act advocating torture of prisoners. Flip a coin. Whoever wants to go first.
Listen, I think that we've been given a false choice by this president and this Congress, this choice that has to be made between protecting this country and upholding basic civil liberties, between keeping this nation safe and observing basic human rights. These are false choices, and frankly, as part of this election, we should challenge those false choices. We can absolutely maintain our commitment to international human rights while protecting this country. We can maintain civil liberties. Do we have to give the executive more powers to combat terrorism throughout the globe? Absolutely, and I support that. But I support it with the proper checks from the judiciary. We can construct a system that will give this executive and the enforcement agencies throughout this country the tools it needs, but to make sure that they are not abused. And Congressman Johnson spent a lot of money in this campaign trying to invent positions for me on this subject that simply do not exist. We can take on that false choice, we can protect this country, and still live up to our 200-year-old obligation to civil liberties.
Yeah, that's a point on which we agree. We can protect this country and protect our traditional civil rights, and I have voted that way. I strongly support the Geneva Convention. And in the Patriots Act, I strongly supported, and my Democrat colleagues did for the most part also, the change to allow the government to wiretap the person. With cell phones, we can no longer limit ourselves to the warrant to wiretap the cell phone. We have to wiretap the person. That's technology driving changes in law enforcement. We had already given law enforcement that power with where drug investigations were involved or organized crime. We just extended to terrorism. And in the international situation, you have to do the same thing. If a call comes from an al-Qaeda organization, this is a very limited exemption. This is just like the Patriots Act. Al-Qaeda organization or 3 or 4 al-Qaeda-associated organizations, the call comes from that organization into our country. I want to pick up that phone and I don't want to wait till you fill out the paperwork, get to the Attorney General, and he says, okay, go.
We're now at the portion of the program where we'll have closing remarks by the candidate. I first ask Nancy Johnson to give her.
I'm amused that my colleague says change Congress. Do you know if the Republicans had not been in control, there would be no prescription drug plan because the Democrats were totally split between a group who wanted a welfare-type plan, more miserly than our COMPACE program, and those who wanted one without a donut hole that was 4 times as expensive, 3 times as expensive, and they couldn't get agreement. It was I and my colleagues that drove through those divisions between those who were concerned about the cost of entitlement and doing something that was terribly important to seniors. On average, they're saving $1,100. But I've had seniors come up to me who are saving $4,000 or $5,000. That's how badly this program was needed. I'm a senior member of the Congress. I've earned that position to the top, most powerful committee because I earned the reputation of being willing to study and understand tough issues and take leadership on them, and I'm proud of that. I'm the only woman on most of the committees I serve on. I'm the only woman on the committee that governs Medicare, which is primarily a health care program for women, and I'm independent. You elect him and you get somebody whose whole history is that the party line's the right answer. I say he votes for this party 97% of the time. That's an average of 8. Some of those years were 99%. I don't know any party that's 99% right. And because I'm senior and because I'm independent, I was able to get Husky through. That was a new entitlement. People didn't like that either until they really got it, that children had to have health care. Some of them didn't like the prescription drug bill. Most of them didn't even understand the chronic disease management part, which I brought to it, but that's going to revolutionize Medicare. Seniors with chronic illnesses, 20% of our seniors have 5 or more chronic illnesses and use 80% of the dollars. I'm thinking and reforming, leading change. College affordability, middle-class tax cuts that drive economic activity. Our revenues were 15% last year, and we're bringing the deficit down by doing the right thing, growing jobs.